All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick. I'm a PhD student in the Interaction Dynamics Lab at UCSC. Is that better? And I'm going to be talking today about Puppitor, where it is, where it came from, what it is, and what it's used for. Now, fighting games. What does this have to do with acting? Well, fighting games are a system for acting out characters and performing them through physicality, but it's mostly through violence and punching, and everything is in support of expression through physicality for punching people in the face. And I looked at this and said, what if we had this, but for interactive narrative and storytelling outside of a fight scene? And what this would let us do is let human and AI players act together within scenes in a systemic way, similar to fighting games. So we built a VN, visual novel, that lets you act out characters alongside an AI and perform scenes primarily through physical acting. And yes, fighting games is one of the guiding designs for how we approach this. And one of the things fighting games have is frame data, which is a way of attaching additional information to the way characters animate. So a punch isn't just an animation of throwing a punch, it has information about when the punch starts becoming dangerous, when it stops being dangerous, that sort of thing, and also how it interacts with other characters. So, narrative frame data. What if we had that sort of abstraction for things other than punching people and throwing fireballs? And the idea is basically to attach things like tone, emotion, that sort of information onto the way characters perform physically. And we don't really have anything like this until we built this system. So this gives us the underlying stuff about how fighting game characters perform animations, but that doesn't give us the way that players and AI actually play the game. The second part of it is the button input system, again, from fighting games. We looked at primarily two of them, Tekken 7 on the left, or my left, and Under Night. And Tekken, the way it uses its buttons is it has 4 buttons. They each control a limb. Every single button can be modified and changed the way that your limb gets used. So if I hit the right punch button, I will always use my right arm. But depending on the direction and a few other things, it will change the nature of exactly how I use my right arm. And from something like Under Night, it has a much higher abstraction for the way it thinks about buttons. Instead of it being about controlling specific body parts, it's instead, are you doing a small, fast move, a sort of middle ground move, or a big, slow, heavy move? And those are A, B, and C. And exactly what those buttons do depends on the character. So you have this sort of consistent general interface, but the specifics are determined by characters. So a C for one character is slashing someone with a sword, whereas a C for another character is hitting them with a whip. All of this to say that fighting games are about expressing character in a very specific way, but they're about expressing character, mostly through the kinds of moves they have access to and also how you even perform the moves in the first place. So, fighting games. How do I perform a fight? How do I control a character in my fight? How do I do this fight? Something like Facade or other interactive dramas, they tend to focus more on what happens. What does my character do? What does my character say? what happens in the general structure of a story? And what am I doing to change the general structure of a story? That isn't what acting in the theater cares about. Acting also cares primarily about how something happens rather than what it does in the broad structure of a plot. And I'm not going to talk about how we use acting to develop a system. Please read the paper if you're interested in that. I don't have time. But we used, for inspiration, No Theater, Stanislavski's method of physical actions, and the viewpoints as a foundation for designing an acting system. And I just want to stress that both these disparate things, fighting games and stage acting, are about expression of character and about the minutia of how we tell stories rather than what exactly the plot direction is for a story. So, what does building an experience to allow AI and human players to act out a scene look like? It looks like this. But the primary part of what Puppitor is a mapping system between whatever input you have in your larger game program and the actions and modifiers that make up what Puppitor uses internally to let you act out a character, and then also how those actions let you change the emotional affect your character is expressing. So the core interface is designed around actions, which are large gesture type things. So like if I lean forward towards someone, that's an action. And modifiers, which are smaller things I can do in addition to larger modifiers. So that could be I lean forward towards someone and I smile, which, depending on how you read things, might make me seem mischievous or flirty, depending on the context. And this is all happening in between our external inputs from, let's say, Unity, and these are getting translated into these specific Puppitor actions. And here's an example mapping of, we have our actions up top, they get translated onto keys. We have our modifiers down below, those also get translated onto keys. And when you press the keys, you will perform your different possible actions. Only one action, one modifier can be true each time. So in our example here, we go from Rika being happy and then we make her sad by holding down one button and one modifier. So the action key map and all of that is about the big things that you see in React directly to player input. The rest of the system, all of the stuff with the affector, that is all about the smaller expression changes and how specifically each action changes a character's emotional state. All right, so this is an example of an affect vector. You have your set of affects you care about, and then you also have their associated values. They can be floats. And then you pass them into the affector, which is mostly a collection of rules about when you do an action, what value do you add or subtract to your current affect vector. So from our example, we close ourselves off. So we are going to start with adding negative 0.5. And then because we are slowing ourselves down, we will multiply that by 0.5 and then subtract, after all of that is done, 0.25 from our joy value and just keep doing that as long as we are closing ourselves off. So that is what gets translated from doing these larger actions. And that's how a player interacts with, or a human player interacts with the system. But what does an AI or an AI player, what do they interact like? And it's basically the same, minus some details about like whether or not they're pressing keyboard buttons, but generally the flow is the same. They perform some kind of input that gets mapped onto a Puppitor action that gets updated, or that says what to update their emotional state with, and that gets translated out into the gestures, facial expressions, everything you're seeing on the left. Now, that's only how the AI controls characters. The question really at this point is, how do they decide what they want to do? And this is where this little section of a rule entry comes in. The adjacent affects list is a weighted directed graph of different affects or a character's associations with different affects. So our character here associates joy very strongly with love and a little bit with worry. And what this means is you can then have your AI search algorithm, for example, have its goals become using its characterful interpretation of what another character is doing. So if my character, Rika with pink hair, is expressing joy, the AI character, who's Chiara on the right, she will mostly end up working on expressing love, but will occasionally choose to express worry, and you'll get a little back and forth of characters performing certain things and throwing in a little extra of other things they associate. And this is all designer authorable. So all of this to say, or all of this is what allows for controlling a character's physicality and having player or human and AI players interact with each other in a systemic way. And doing some initial playtesting, we found that this got people to start exploring not only just the system itself, but also then how they felt their performance connected to the text they were seeing, rather than just, I will play with the system and see what the characters do. They started thinking more about, am I happy with the performance that I gave, rather than just, I am doing a performance and moving on. All right. Thank you. If you want to check out the visual novel itself, it's on my itch page at Quakeful/Tracks and Snow Showcase. If you want to look at the Python version, that is Puppitor without anything on it. And then if you want a C# version, for example, for Unity, you can go to the Puppitor-C# library. Thank you.